I really appreciate you all coming this morning, and I would like to thank Christoph and, of course, Steve for inviting me and bringing me over. It's very exciting to be here and see some old faces that I have seen through the years, and, of course, meet some new people that I haven't met before. There are some discrepancy in what Christoph said. Actually, my PhD is from '92. I'm not that old, okay? He wants to make me older than him. I'm older than him, but he wants to make me way older than him, you know. So yes, I'm Bulgarian, and I was born and raised in that country. But then I moved to the United States, where I enjoyed practically all my professorial career. So what I will going to be showing you today is, of course, not my labors. It's the labors of all these people that are listed here. These are my former students that are already somewhere working, former PhD students. These are my doctorants. They all work wherever they are listed here, and my former postdocs that they and their current occupation. And this is my current students, and my students that are joining me this fall that are already working in the laboratory, and my current postdoctoral fellows and researchers. So essentially, the work of these people will be presented, but the work of these people is based on the work of all these people. So that's pretty much to give you a concept of the size of the laboratory and how many people we are. And this laboratory is a part of the chemical and nuclear engineering department on the chemical engineering side, when we have three centers: biomedical engineering, center for micro-engineered materials, and the Center for Emerging Energy Technologies. So this group is a part of the Center for Emerging Energy Technologies. The university that I belong to is at Albuquerque. Albuquerque is in the heart of New Mexico. New Mexico is a state. It is not part of Mexico. Mexico actually is right here. You know, it used to be, of course, until 145 years ago. Actually, this is not even New Mexico, this is Texas from this part on. It has a very small border with Mexico, and this is the only border that is not actually guarded, because if you can cross this border and come to Silver City, you deserve citizenship. You don't need to have any, this is the Chihuahua Desert. It's about 300 miles of a sheer desert, no water. If you survive, you deserve any sort of admiration. Very different thing in California. This is really zero illegal immigrant control border. There is no need. The first policeman is right here. Actually, I'm not kidding. If we're looking at this map, the first border control post is right here, because there is no need to control anything from this point down. New Mexico is a state of the cultural heritage in the United States. There are actually 4 UNESCO sites of human heritage in the United States, and one of them is French. Do you know that? The Statue of Liberty in New York. It's French by origin. The other 3 are actually in New Mexico. So if there is a cultural heritage, it belongs to the Anasazi Indians, who were inhabiting the lands of New Mexico. Mesa Verde, technically the entrance is from Colorado, but it's on New Mexico-Colorado border. Taos Pueblo is the longest inhabited structure in North America. It's more than 1,100 years of habitation. It's an Indian village. And then Chaco Canyon is the largest Indian ruins of the Chacoan culture. All 3 are, of course, national parks and are extremely interesting place to visit. What makes our laboratory different from the rest is that University of New Mexico is located uniquely along the Rio Grande Technological Corridor, that for us specifically gives an access to Los Alamos National Laboratory and to Sandia National Laboratory. Actually, Sandia National Laboratory is the whole southern part of Albuquerque, and Los Alamos National Laboratory is in this crater on a canyon to the south east part of that crater. That's a Jemez Mountain crater, a volcano that blew up some, 60 million years ago. This essentially is a weapons laboratory, as you probably know, and Sandia is a weapons laboratory as well. Sandia used to be the so-called division Z of Los Alamos. This is when the weapons are conceived. This is where the weapons are made. That's the main difference. So essentially, the straight corridor of the initiation of the military-industrial complex. And that puts, of course, a mark on the entire community. It puts the mark on what kind of a business we're interested in, and of course, a huge emphasis on material science and engineering in the University of New Mexico. My laboratory is interested in designing catalysts. I'm actually bioelectrochemist by training, and that's why I'm putting in the center of my interest the enzyme electrocatalysis. And learning from enzyme electrocatalysis has been a hallmark of how we do business in my laboratory. But you cannot survive these days by doing bioelectrochemistry, not at least in the United States. We engage in electrocatalysis on the level of metal clusters and extended metal surfaces, on metal inorganic and metal organic compounds and frameworks, and of course on oxide materials and any combination of thereof. So this is pretty much the philosophy of my laboratory. We are very much concerned with using fuel cells or electrolyzers or flow batteries or other battery systems, but as a definition, just for those of you who are not engaged in fuel cell technology, the fuel cells are electrochemical flow-through reactors in which the fuel and the oxidant are fed continuously into a reaction zone, and that reaction zone is formed on both sides of a separator that provides ionic conductivity. For low temperatures fuel cells, that separators is a polymeric material. For high temperature fuel cells, that could be a conducting oxide or conducting ceramics. In general, we are mostly concerned with this catalysis on the triphase interface that is provided by the gaseous phase that feeds the oxidant or the fuel and withdraws the products, and the solid phase that ensures the electrical conductivity, and the ionic conducting phase, which in our case is polymeric electrolyte that provides for the ionic conductivity. Fuel cells are characterized by their losses. And by some reason, electrochemists, being practically optimistic people, call their losses overpotential. If they were realistic, they would call it underpotential, I guess. But the overpotential is a way of expression of how much you lose from the thermodynamically given value. That if you are trying to oxidize hydrogen with respect to oxygen electrochemically, your thermodynamically given value, it comes from God through his prophet, Josiah Willard Gibbs. You cannot get a larger value than 1.23. Everything else that you get at any given current is a loss. And those losses, if you oxidize hydrogen, are predominantly concentrated on the cathode side. So they are all associated with reduction of oxygen. So any reasonable electrocatalysis lab has to have program in making catalysts for oxygen reduction, because this is where the most of the losses are. If you start oxidizing fuel different than hydrogen, you start inquiring losses on the anode as well. That is why any reasonable electrochemical engineering laboratory has to have program in anode oxidation catalysts if they are not for hydrogen. So essentially my laboratory does electrocatalysis of everything else except hydrogen. We have a very small program about hydrogen oxidation because hydrogen oxidizes pretty well. And we do have a comprehensive programs on reduction of oxygen. Over the last decade, a substantial paradigm shift was observed in the way we now understand the electroreduction of oxygen on non-platinum catalysts and electroreduction of oxygen on platinum catalysts. And this shift in the paradigm didn't only come with the increase of the turnover number or making catalysts better and better. It categorically postulated that the two types of catalysts are dramatically different by design. Practically speaking, in order to design good platinum catalyst, you have to design a defect-less surface. In order to design a good non-platinum catalyst, you have to design defects. So you have like two worlds that both work in the same direction, but they are dramatically different by the methods that you employ to achieve success. And that is actually bringing an even bigger differentiation between the platinum people and the non-platinum people. In that sense, practically speaking, the nanometallurgy is needed to understand better and better platinum catalysis or platinum group metal catalysis. And actually, ceramics engineering of defects is needed to make better electrocatalysts that are of non-platinum class. And I know that this laboratory had contributed to both quite dramatically over the last 25 years. So where we come with our little contribution is with the fact that we recognize that for every single phenomena that happens in the fuel cell, there is a length scale at which you need to design. We come to say as chemical engineers, and I'm a professor of chemical engineering, although I was trained as a physical chemist, I got corrupted very early, so I escaped to a better paying side of the business. So we are interested in designing the catalyst as a whole. Actually, for my laboratory, there is no such a thing as a substrate or active site or a catalyst. We think of holistic design because design on every length scale is important for success. If you design only at the level of the active site, you will very soon become diffusion and transport limited, and you will never be able to reveal the potential of your design. Essentially, the industry is interested in operation, and operation is given to you by the holistic design of the catalyst. In order to achieve that, we are one of the several groups in the world that are actually propagating the idea of open framework catalysts. This idea is old as the world. I mean, I'm using here this Tilem modulus reformulated with epsilon as opposed to theta, because I know some other letters from the Greek alphabet, you know, and because to say that electrochemical Tilem modulus also makes sense. And this has been known to people all around catalysis community, that if you would like to increase the accessibility of your active sites from concave structures, you need to move to the convex structures for propagation of your masses through the catalyst bed. Essentially, in these types of catalyst structure, which currently dominates the market, was imposed by a manufacturing method. It was not designed to be optimal for performance. It was designed because it is the easiest to make. It is the maker's market. And now this is the buyer's market. If you want to really sell performance, then you make the structure to correspond to it. And that comes the idea of hierarchically structured materials. And they would be organized exactly in the same way as a modern urban city. You will have big avenues, smaller streets and cul-de-sacs, and you can build way more townhomes around the cul-de-sacs, these are your active sites, and you can use the small streets to take out the garbage. It means your product of the reaction, and you will use the avenues to supply, the goods, to bring in the products or the reactants. So that hierarchical structure, if you can make it to correspond to every single transport or chemical process level, you will be the most successful in engaging the catalyst structure operating entirely. So that's the concept of the holistic design. And that is what we do. In my laboratory, we make these three-dimensional structures, and we support on them platinum catalysts, or we support on them non-platinum catalysts, or we make active supports that are made of specific oxides or ceramics. We even make biocatalysts supported on them for conversion of biomass and gathering energy from biofuels. So this ideology propagates the entire spectrum of the work of my laboratory. In the biological fuel cells, that usually are silica carbon composites that are hierarchically structured, or carbon nanotube graphite graphite paper composites. I'm just giving this slide as a teaser to tell you that about 1/3 of what we do as business has to do with enzyme electrocatalysis or microbial electrocatalysis for wastewater treatment or for devices that are at low power rate but can utilize unusual fuels like glucose or even higher fuels. In the inorganic part of my laboratory, which is 2/3, we have 2 synthesis platforms. Something happened with this thing. Okay, whatever. We'll fix the fonts later. We have 2 synthesis platforms, and one synthesis platform is spray pyrolysis. To synthesize hierarchically structured materials. Spray pyrolysis is a horizontal wall lamellar flow reactor that takes aerosol of a precursor and converts thermally in a flow of either inert or reactive gas, and you get a powder as a result of that conversion. Spray pyrolysis has been a hallmark of our department. Every monkey and his mother has made a career on spray pyrolysis in our department. People had made centers based on the spray pyrolysis. Other people have become National Academy members. The only person who is not a center director is our department chair, and he is actually the person who develops the spray pyrolysis as a method today. And these are just a kaleidoscope of different structures that one can make using spray pyrolysis in various cases. I personally was involved in making spray pyrolysis into a method to make electrocatalysts. And I did that at the beginning at a small company called Superior Micropowders, which is a spin-off from our department by 2 professors, Mark Hamden-Smith, who was an organometallic chemist, and Toivo Kodos, who is a chemical engineer. And we scaled up. I was their product development and R&D manager. And we scaled up the process of essentially making a spray pyrolysis product to a reasonable format. And this is David Dericotti. He is my shortest student. That is why we always photograph him right next to the bunker. So, you can think that the bunker is bigger. Okay? But it is a pretty sizable instrument that provides a synthesis platform for about a kilogram an hour if needed in processing of ceramic materials. The way to make electrocatalyst by spray pyrolysis was essentially advantageous because it allows you to, for example, make platinum, or in this case, this is a photograph of a platinum ruthenium material supported on carbon without the use of any reducing species. No formaldehyde, no formic acid, nothing. At the thermal processing, actually, the platinum material reduces itself by oxidizing the amorphous part of the carbon. And by that, actually increases the graphitic content of the carbon support. So you, at the same time, eat away the bad carbon, and you don't use additional things. Because ultimately, in your catalyst, you want to have as little things possible in the reaction mix for a one-pot synthesis. All these beautiful things like surfactants and other shit, that people use to make things beautiful, they are absolutely a no-no in the industry because they're very difficult to get rid of afterwards. So from a practical engineering standpoint, the simpler, the better in the point of view of manufacturing. So here you have simply a salt of platinum and ruthenium, in this case, dissolved together with the carbon suspension and passed through the reactor. So it deposits itself on the surface of the carbon, at the same time eats away the amorphous carbon. As you see, only turbotropic structure of the graphitic carbon is left, and then that carbon is packed together into these 3-dimensional ball-like structures, and those actually, if you can actually process them to include the naphthalene inside and the Teflon inside in desirable reactive mix. With that, you obtain spheroidal particles that are micron size, several microns in size. Very important, because you cannot handle dry powders in nanometer size in any factory. The factory will be, at least in America, the factory will be closed immediately for health risk reasons. The only particles you can handle is bigger than 5 microns in a dry state. That is why the so-called powder nanotechnology does not exist. It exists only in the papers of scientists. It does not exist on the manufacturing floor. This is the way to supply nanomaterials packaged in the right size for the manufacturing. So additional advantage of this manufacturability platform is that the materials come spheroidal, so they can be applied through digital printing. And digital printing allows for both high fidelity and high throughput in manufacturing. Like this is an example of a fully printed MEA. Entirely, everything is printed, including the current collectors, the gas diffusion layer, and the catalyst layer. It's a fully printed by design, and it has absolutely no material that is being used by stenciling or other method. It's all printed on like an inkjet printer with a dedicated head for every material. So that printing platform allowed a scale up of the printing with a high fidelity and high throughput, and enabled another company from Denmark to come to Albuquerque and license a part of that portfolio and build essentially a factory to make membrane electrode assemblies forward integrating from the catalyst manufacturing. So now you can see that from this simple invention that came with, of course, superior micropowders sold itself to Cabot, and that became a Cabot fuel cells. And Cabot grew superior micropowders, was 14 people business. Now it's a 275 people business in town. And then IRD came in and built another factory of 14 people now. Maybe one day when we start doing business, it will be another 240 people business. So you have a direct impact on the labor force and the development of the city, as it is important to give jobs with a higher level of pay. So it is not janitor jobs, it is jobs for chemical engineers. These two companies employ about maybe 15% of my graduate students. And they also, here's a demonstration of all sorts of materials you can make with spray pyrolysis. You can make single crystal materials, and I will show you some use of single crystal materials, or almost single crystal. Let's call them phase pure. You know, they're crystalloids. You know, or you can make critical composites that are almost one-to-one between a metal and oxide. I'll show you some use of those materials. You can make decorated phase materials, or you can make oxides that are structured, you know, and all of this is made practically by one reactor. The beauty is that I have the 1 liter reactor in my laboratory, or 3 of those, from which the company started, and they have a 10 hectoliter reactors in the company. So the scale up is transparent, and we have the same books. If I can produce 500 milligrams an hour a catalyst, in 1 month they can scale it to 5 kilograms catalyst without much, well, of course with an intense collaboration, but with a direct transparency, because there are 3 generations of instruments between my laboratory reactor and the full production scale reactor. And depending on what scale is needed for the industry, we can have a direct transmission. If you come to me, so this is my pledge. If you see a paper published with my name, in 1 week you can have 1 gram of catalyst from me. In 1 month you can have 5 grams of catalyst from me. And if you are a business, in 1 month you can have a contract for 1 kilogram of catalyst in 4 months from me and Cabot, of any single paper that is out with my name. And that is the difference between our laboratory and the laboratory of so many other people that make what I call pretty pictures. They make a TEM, SEM, publish a paper in Nature, and then they disappear. And the industry comes and knocks on their door and they say $3 million. What I usually say is, give me 3 months or 4 months and you will have 1 kilogram. And then you can drive an automobile on that. And that is the difference in approach. And that is why we are a chemical engineering department. So our first introduction in the academia, when I stepped back to university, was to make the most expensive catalyst ever. Because in industry, I had to make the cheapest catalyst ever. You know, industry is only interested in cheap. When you go back and become a professor, you can do whatever you want, because nobody really asks you how much money it costs. So we started making nanostructured catalysts based on platinum and palladium alloys, like this nanostructured or microstructured catalyst that is based on platinum ruthenium. It was one of the most expensive catalysts ever made, but you can make them with different materials, and they can oxidize ethanol, they can oxidize, of course, methanol, and they are very good for transport and for deployment because of the spheroidal morphology, as you can see. In the same family of catalysts, they can be even more complex. You can make trimetallic catalysts with the same way. essentially, if you have a customer, let's say the Department of Defense, that wants some fancy small fuel cell and they don't care how much it costs, you can make them an extremely active catalyst for oxidation of ethylene glycol or even glycerol with this nanostructured approach. And it can be scaled and it can be produced, mass produced. It just will cost hell, you know. And the bad news about costing a hell is actually the fact that you always need to add your manufacturing cost over the cost of the noble metal. And you always lose a lot of noble metal in the manufacturing. Practically the only company that is viable that can make platinum-based catalyst is the company that has a very robust technology of recovery of platinum from the reactors. Because you always deploy on your reactors 3/5 of your platinum, approximately. 60% of platinum does not go to the catalyst, it goes to platinize every single vessel that you use. And then you need to have a very good technology to take platinum back, or palladium or whatever. So if you are working on platinum-based catalyst, please provide to your collaborators technology of recovering. Then you will become actually a player in the field. Without that technology, you have only two companies to work with, Johnson Matthey and Union Minière, because these are the two companies that have very good technology for recovery of platinum from their reactors. Other companies are babies compared to these two, you know, for various reasons. Of course, we make such catalysts and we characterize them with infrared spectroscopy to see whether or not we can observe the evolution of carbon dioxide, and this is usually our measure of the success of oxidation of complex fuels. We, similar to the colleagues here in this institute, we have interest of making catalysts to oxidize higher and higher oxygenated fuels, potentially going towards glycerol or even something beyond glycerol as possible. The complexity of the fuels is originally was thought to be within like a platinum-ruthenium tin, bimetallic, trimetallic phase. But then we are coming into the inability to actually oxidize oxalate and malate. And oxalate and malate in the tree of oxidation of glycerol is extremely deep hole thermodynamically. And that is why we propose some, let's say, a crossbreed method that allows to immobilize some enzymes like NADH-dependent dehydrogenases that will help crossing through that path. So we propose this hybrid non-metallic enzymatic catalysis layer to go together with the catalysis layer. It was possible only because of the hierarchical structure. We can put the catalyst site on one level of hierarchy and the enzyme on the higher level of hierarchy material. Alternatively, we designed active supports with spray pyrolysis. Here is a, I apologize, my image is a little bit better. The luminosity of this is not enough to shine through the TIFF image here. So essentially, you should be able to see a structure similar to that in this particle that is a lamellar structure. This is a niobium oxide, fourth valency, that is stabilized to fourth valency with some component of ruthenium oxide, like a ruthenium-doped niobium oxide, and the fourth to be conductive. And that is a sample that approaches 200 meters square per gram, which is huge surface area. Think of how heavy niobium oxide is. So 200 meters square per gram niobium oxide is like a 1,650 meters square per gram carbon. So that was used by our group. We developed synthesis of it, and we were using it as a porous material, again obtained with spray pyrolysis, to have decorated platinum phases of about 2 nanometers in size within the entire particle, and deployed a catalyst that is based on that system when we now make these platinum particles to be a platinum-ruthenium alloy, a very advanced system for ethanol oxidation in alkaline media. So, and in that system, we observe CO2 formation, and we have measured and published together with Brookhaven National Laboratory approximately 34-35% yield by volume of CO2 from ethanol. So for our group, that is the achievement. I know that steaming have shown a higher conversion just a month ago in Toronto with a totally different system that uses about 100 times more platinum for that. But this is a system with active support. Now, in our current generation of catalysts that are from the system with palladium, we developed catalysts with palladium and copper, and currently we just published a paper literally this week with palladium and fifth group metal, P metals like indium, in which part of that metal is present as oxide. So we practically are obtaining a system that has 3 components, but is used only 2 metals. So when you have a platinum copper, it's a platinum copper alloy, bimetallic, and there is a copper oxide that is present in that system. So all the 3 things that you need for ethanol oxidation are present in the material, but you use only 2 ingredients to make that. Again, we would like to have that to simplify the manufacturing, because making these extremely beautiful core shell structures with a decorated nanophase is beautiful for cover art of nature materials, but you cannot knock on the door of any manufacturing industry and say, I want 1 kilogram of that tomorrow. A success story for our group came with a phase pure palladium zinc catalyst that we transferred to a nickel zinc similar phase, and a nickel zinc synthesized by spray pyrolysis is our base catalyst for oxidation of hydrazine, and later we combined that with non-platinum catalyst that we also developed for alkaline media, and with the help of a small car manufacturer. Actually, it's a big manufacturer of small cars. So it's a small car manufacturer, Daihatsu Corporation, which maybe some of you know is a component company of Toyota Motor Group. We developed the materials for both anode and cathode for their automotive stack. And last year in December, the first prototype, I call it the toaster, because it looks like a toaster. I think it's lovely. But the first functional prototype of a hydrazine hydrate direct liquid fuel car was shown on Tokyo Motor Show. This is the first automobile on Earth without any single milligram of platinum. So, and this thing moves. For those of you who are interested, I can show you a video. I usually don't put videos in my presentation because they always crash and they create a havoc. But I can show you a video of Toyota Motor Company president driving this thing around on a motorway. Both catalysts on this fuel cell are invented at UNM, scaled up at Cabot, and then manufactured in Albuquerque, manufactured into MEAs by IRD, and supplied to Japan to make stack. This is what I call turning the tides, because in America we are usually very used to buying things from Japan, not selling things to Japan. So I take particular pride of being able to sell things to Japan. And that's kind of my little horse there. So the second platform comes with a microemulsion templating. So this is an alternative platform to the aerosol processing. It's a colloidal platform. It is based on microemulsions that are very unfortunately named like that. If they were invented 10 years ago, we would call them nanoemulsions. But at that time, people didn't know that nano is very important. So microemulsions are, stabilized colloidal systems that are usually obtained on a water-oil interface when the surface tension goes down to 0. And the way to get the surface tension down to almost 0 is when you have a mix of 2 soaps. One surfactant is predominantly soluble in water, so it has excess critical methyl concentration in water, and the other surfactant is predominantly soluble in the oil phase. So it has MCM in oil phase. Then these two surfactants will coexist on the interface and will practically break down the phase to the so-called Windsor phases. And Windsor phases occupy substantial part of the phase diagram, and that's why some people think that they are thermodynamically stable. I will not going to go into the philosophical debate whether a mayonnaise is thermodynamically stable. I know that if I forget a mayonnaise for 2 years in my refrigerator, it will be extremely not pleasant thing to see. You know, if it was thermodynamically stable, this mayonnaise would have been good 100 years from now, isn't it? So, but let's forget about mayonnaise. This actually looks like mayonnaise when you make it. That's why I'm reminding that. So what is now left is essentially to make a template of it. What we did in our laboratory is we make silica inside the water phase of a microemulsion droplets, and then we wash away the silica, the oil, and then we impregnate with a carbon precursor, and then we take away the silica by etching, and you end up with a three-dimensional structure which is hierarchical, and it is hierarchical because you have a template of a very small particles, very small pores that are not from the microemulsion, but these small pores are from the micelles that are in excess. So you have a micelle templating, microemulsion templating, and the entire particle templating. You have 3 levels of control if you need. So that is how you obtain these particles that have the catalyst phase deposited within the pores, and then you propagate down. Look at this image. It's like a negative image of the microemulsion directly. We recently published a paper that is discussing ethanol oxidation catalyst based on a platinum tin family that is exactly deployed within the structure of such microemulsion. For liquid fat fuel cells, hierarchical structure in hydrophilic environment is extremely important because it is very easy to run your anode into a transport limitation mode. The other thing which is extremely important for liquid fuel cells is to have open phase structure, because if you really make a good catalyst, it will start gassing out. And once it starts gassing out, and if the gas is trapped in your anode, you are dead. You are dead because you're so good. So if you start making CO2, usually people who are beginners in DMFC are experiencing a huge advance to one point, and then they have a crash, and their crash is an engineering crash because they cannot outgas their anode. We had absolutely the same problem that we solved with the design of the hydrazine hydrate cell. Can you imagine oxidation of hydrazine on the catalyst? It like a boils out nitrogen. So the outgassing of the catalyst was the primary challenge in design from the point of view of morphology, and from the point of view of chemistry, it was selectivity of hydrazine oxidation. When you cannot afford to have nitrogen-nitrogen bond splitting, you have to have only dehydrogenation, because if you split and then bond, you make ammonia. If you make ammonia, you smell bad. You cannot have an ultra clean car smell like ammonia, you know. And we sense 10 pp. Some ladies smell 1 ppb. Most people like me smell 10 to 100 ppb of ammonia. I can see, even I have sinusitis, 100 ppb ammonia will open it up. I'll start breathing very well. Okay. So this way we have 2 platforms, and one platform gives you a different level of control than the other. So you can choose what level of control you want based either on aerosol platform or on colloidal platform, and design catalysts depending of what parameters you have. I'm sorry, this diagram is a little bit misleading, but these are like a 3 microns, and here 3 microns will be here. I should remake this diagram because this is extended like a 10 times. Okay? So this shows you that the level of control is on totally different structural level. Okay? This diagram is like, this is 8 microns, and here is 2 microns when it's ending. Like. So you can select at what level of structure is important. Now, I'll give you an example with non-platinum catalysts for fuel cells, because that is usually considered very important. It is important because for the deployment of fuel cell technology, the cost and availability of platinum is of critical importance. Doesn't matter what you do, you ultimately are paying one company to make fuel cell cars. And that company is part of the Anglo-American, which is a consortium. That's the name of the consortium. It's not Anglo-American. It's practically mostly British. But it's called Anglo-American company that owns South Africa, 34 mines out of 37, owned only by that company. That company trading index is Johnson Matthey. They practically control the cost of platinum on the London Stock Exchange. Russians have 11 mines, but since 2000, they don't sell platinum. They pronounce platinum to be a strategic metal, and they don't participate with their platinum on the London Metal Exchange. So America has one mine, and it doesn't work because it's not economically feasible. Canada has one mine, doesn't work, and Brazil has one mine, doesn't work. So all the 3 mines in the New World actually are only mines. You can buy them if you want. They are not operational. Then what we have here is everything is in South Africa, and everything is controlled by one company in London. And as a result, you have an extremely volatile profile of platinum cost. And you cannot make economic predictions because this is about, platinum is 50% of the cost of the MEA, 50%, which results in 22-21% of the cost of the entire stack. So your major single component is extremely volatile, and it's expensive. If it was only expensive, okay, design around that. But expensive and volatile and over-concentrated in a part of the world that is not necessarily very stable, it creates all 3 parameters, geopolitical instability, external control. From the point of view of United States, it's very important that there is no internal mechanism of controlling. So Department of Energy clearly says that it needs to be solved to go forward. And do you know actually what happened here when this crash happened in the platinum cost? How many of you are politically savvy in American politics? It is not the crash of the market. The crash of the market actually happened right here. It started going down before the crash. It was the announcement of Stephen Chu as a Secretary of Energy in the first Obama administration. Because Stephen Chu was known to be against fuel cells. The entire platinum market went down because they knew who will be at that time, 4 years ago, the new secretary. So if a single political announcement can cause this thing, it's bad, So that's why we need to look into designing with something that is less rare than these materials. And there are beautiful people that are trying to replace platinum with palladium. How nice. Let me see how much you win by changing platinum to palladium. The availability is exactly the same. The reason why palladium costs 45 to 47% of platinum today is because there is less use. And there is no need and there is no desire for palladium as a jewelry. Jewelry is 30% of platinum today. Catalyst in catalytic chemistry is 35% of platinum. Catalytic conversions about 30% of platinum, and about 30% is jewelry. So we still have a good resource because society can withdraw from jewelry and engage that in technology. That is possible. You find some nice guys like Pierre Cardin or something, tell them that to promote only yellow gold for our wives, and our wives start liking yellow gold more. They become like a Turkish wives, and no white gold. So we can do fuel cells. But that's of course not viable, isn't it? So the reality is that there are also other people that would like to deploy fuel cell technology by making platinum iridium alloy. Well, this is idiotic. Do you know why? For the record, this is really idiotic. Because iridium and osmium on Earth have meteoritic origin. They actually come from the sky. So iridium is that level on Earth that is by pulverization of the big meteorite that killed the dinosaurs and made the Gulf of Mexico. Otherwise, there probably is iridium, but it's in the core, in the magma. So on the Earth crust, there is no terrestrial iridium and osmium. All of it comes from there. Can you make industry based on that? I cannot. Or you have to be extremely kind of a, futuristic to think that you can go and collect asteroids and make them into, there is company like that. Do you know that? They made some kind of a stupid headway. So nature does a reduction of oxygen by use of transition metals like iron and copper, and by associating these transition metals in such a way to afford docking of oxygen molecule and splitting it and forming water. And throughout living organisms, only these two metals are used for oxygen reduction. We as humans are similar to the urchins and starfish, and everything after that are using iron. And we are about 10% of biological mass. The remaining, which is bacteria, microorganisms, all the plants use copper. And all the organisms, the insects also use copper. They use copper enzymes to do that. So use of copper actually dominates. We focus on using of iron because it is close to our own soul. Like we pay more attention to what we do. Practically speaking, it is because biomedical research was motivating a lot of biochemical research, and the knowledge of the oxygen electrochemistry in the organisms at the very beginning came mostly from the studies of respiration and human body and physiology. So we were kind of a human-centric in our understanding. We were not global. Now the microbial physiology is enough mature science to provide alternative ways of thinking. One way or the other, the iron-centric opinions, since many, many years ago, 1964, when Jasinic published the paper about porphyrins and tetraaza-anolens can be used as a catalyst, was all centric about this idea that direct replica of biological species, even through pyrolysis or chemical synthesis, can lead to successful catalysts for oxygen reduction. What I call this is the exercise of flying by flipping. It is like Daedalus, who was trying to make a flying machine by replicating how the birds fly. We tried that for 2,000 years. It was not successful. Only until we removed ourselves from direct replication and from flipping wings, we tried to fly with a straight wing, what is the Brothers Wright invention, we were able to fly. Here, the flipping wings is the role of this pyrolytic type environment that iron is supposed to be in. That was believed for 3 or 4 decades to be a paradigm. You have to synthesize your catalyst to resemble a porphyrin, and only then it will going to work. That paradigm turned out to be practically a false paradigm. And only when somebody comes and says, okay, it is important for the iron to be coordinated, but not in a pyrolytic, but in pyridinic environment. And then these catalysts started working better, and they started meeting the requirements of technology. So that is the change from a formal biomimetic to a bio-inspired design of catalyst. You again have some kind of a coordinated environment for the iron, but it is no longer a direct mimic. And then, doesn't matter how you look at that and to different individuals who produce these concepts, you end up actually designing defects in the lattice of a graphite, or a graphene as we will say today. So you're arriving at the concept of a defect engineering, and I will show you some more of that later. Ultimately, people who design catalysts in this family of transition metal nitrogen carbon type, and this is not the only type of non-platinum oxygen reduction catalyst. Nicola Alonso Vante have been propagating the chalcogenide types of catalyst, and other people have introduced a lot on the metal oxide type of catalyst. But this is one of the three main classes currently being looked at. There are two parties. One party, who are actually wrong, are trying to introduce the idea that one can reduce oxygen without the transition metal. The main and the other party to which I belong, this is the right party, is the one that insists that a transition metal is needed in order to reduce oxygen to water. The first party forgets one thing. It is not a question of reducing oxygen. It's a question of making water. So the fact that you observe reduction of oxygen is not enough. You need to see the formation of the water, or actually the absence of hydrogen peroxide. A reduction of oxygen on carbonaceous and doped carbonaceous materials to peroxide is the industrial method of making peroxide. This is how technology makes peroxide. To sell it for you, to bleach your hair, this is how it is done, this way, on activated carbon. So anyway, the other thing that people don't tell you usually is that there are three principal mechanisms of oxygen reduction to water on such materials, including on platinum. The most desired one is to have reduction to water on the same active site. That doesn't happen always. Actually, I should tell you that it almost doesn't happen at all. The more prevalent in a good catalyst is a mechanism in which hydrogen peroxide is formed, but the same active site is also active towards hydrogen peroxide, and it reduces the peroxide to water on the same site without leaving the site. And majority of the non-platinum catalysts, unfortunately, reduce oxygen to hydrogen peroxide and then reduce peroxide to water. And we have written papers about that, and people cite those papers but continue to insist that their catalysts don't work that way. The majority of the catalysts work that way. And if you don't have rotating disk electrodes data at different loadings, you cannot show anything to discriminate that site away. And people usually try not to publish low loadings of electrocatalyst research because in the low loadings peroxide flies out. They always want, the best graduate student or a postdoc tries to put as much as possible catalyst on the electrode, then all the peroxide is internally consumed, and he said, boss, I make the 4-electron reduction catalyst. Voila. This is the biggest lie. And this lie propagates through papers from Electrochemical Acta to Science and Nature. You can see papers in Nature published claiming 4-electron reduction when there is a 4-electron stoichiometry. There is a difference between 4-electron mechanism and 4-electron stoichiometry. If you collect 4 electrons, that doesn't mean that the mechanism is a 4-electron mechanism. You collect them in multiple steps. So that is the critical point of discriminating in design. And the purpose is actually to start from a catalyst, it's whatever, some shit, You start from something, and then make it better. And the way to make it better is to make the second site to be more active and less selective. So essentially decreasing selectivity and increasing the activity towards hydrogen peroxide will shift you here. And then the second is increasing the stabilization of hydrogen peroxide on the site will shift you here. If you just allow yourself to understand that things are not as good as you promise, it can give you the opportunity to make them better. If you only start by thinking that you have just discovered everything, you will never make your catalyst better. Okay, that's my little thing. So everybody and his mother today makes catalysts by pyrolyzing things that have nitrogen and carbon and obtain something that is really good. 2 or 3 groups can make catalysts that are really good in oxygen reduction. But then when it comes to actually meeting the industry standards, they all do that by extrapolation. And they do it by extrapolation because their structure of the catalyst does not allow transport. The transport limitations start quite early. They are not starting as they tell you when they are dominating. Usually the end of the polarization curve, when it wears down, is when the transport dominates. The transport actually is present, and the ohmic losses are actually present throughout the voltammogram. So everybody who publishes high-profile papers fails to actually deliver exactly because of lack of transport. So they create catalysts that are good, but these catalysts don't work when the industrial vendor asks them to work. So that limitation is overcome by our templating method, that we get silica, we make the catalyst around the silica, and then we extract the silica away. So in that way we have a non-supported or self-supported catalyst that consists only of the catalyst material. That allows you for two things. One, you don't have support in the active mass, you have only active mass. So any spectroscopical method of studying that catalyst will give you information about the catalyst. You don't have support effect in recognition of what is active site and what is not. And then you have this open frame structure that allows you for the transport. And you can, of course, pyrolyze everything in that format. For example, you can pyrolyze porphyrins. And you can identify that the majority of the backbone, what is left from the pyrolysis, is generated by the pyropolymerization of those products. But you also have a micrometallurgy of the transition metal that is identified as individual phases, and those are naturally covered by its native oxide. So in these materials, if you do not remove the native oxide, actually that native oxide creates the site for the secondary reduction of peroxide to water. And the backbone of the catalyst, which is a pyrolytic polymer that has N3 centers, N2 centers, N centers, and even graphitic nitrogen, all of them are presented in the material, presents the first site for the absorption. And then naturally, there is a third site that is heterogeneous decomposition of hydrogen peroxide. All these three processes happen. And the question is to make a better catalyst is to eliminate this and to make this site to do both jobs. And that is what is happening when you design the catalyst further. We have shown that you can start with any nitrogen precursor, porphyrin, a polymer, amine, or heteropolyamine or heteroamine, and your enter is this general temperature time trajectory at different points, and depends on the time temperature history, you can arrive at a different point of your catalyst structure. You can under pyrolyze your catalyst, you'll end up with a pyrrolic-like pyropolymer that will produce a lot of peroxide and never will reduce oxygen to water. You can lock that structure into further with a fast quenching and have a graphitic material with a lot of pyrrolic nitrogen. Or you can further pyrolyze with a longer pyrolysis and obtain different populations of defects. And you walk through this pyrolytic chemistry to obtain the catalyst that you want, and all of them, regardless of what is your precursor, will end up in something after optimization that is very similar to each other. One such active catalyst recently, because we didn't know what type of nitrogen is needed, we started pyrolyzing catalysts that have all sorts of nitrogen. So the precursor will give you food for any stomach. So we don't know what is the nitrogen that is needed. We put a molecule that will have anyone. And you yield with a very active catalyst. Of course, we support that on silica. Then we remove the silica away. You get this open frame structure. There are particles of iron, because there was an iron nitrate in part of the salt, and that particles of iron are covered by the graphite-like structure. Now, majority of the oxide is removed because the etching we do with HF. And HF removes all the oxides and all exposed iron. So only the iron that is fully encapsulated like this particle will remain. And still it makes about 1.5% by weight. Then you test it, and it is truly active, not only for oxygen reduction. Yes, it does produce 1 to 5% peroxide, but it is very active for peroxide reduction as well. And then you optimize this catalyst. You actually see how, depending on the catalyst loading, you move from a 4-electron formal towards 2 electron formal when you decrease the loading. That means that the catalyst really works in a bifunctional mechanism. You simply, when the catalyst is a very thin film, the peroxide can escape. When the catalyst is thick film, it also reduces peroxide inside the catalyst. You can make bimetallic and trimetallic catalysts by this way, and in this case you can introduce, in the case of manganese as a second metal, you introduce a very good catalyst to reduce essentially hydrogen peroxide locally. One of the most active catalysts is manganese oxide for hydrogen peroxide capture and reduction. And that catalyst immediately improves the performance. So now here comes the non-traditional thinking. Every chemist thinks that the species have to ligand the iron in a solution in order to make a good catalyst. That's why our first choice was a very cheap material with a lot of nitrogen that makes a fantastic red complex with iron when you put it in solution. And you say, great, it will make a great catalyst. Then you say, okay, does it really need it to make a ligand? Maybe the pyrolytic chemistry that happens after 700 degrees C doesn't require that complex formation. Then we put another amine that we specifically selected not to make a complex with iron. And we make the impregnation with that. The catalyst was comparable and in some cases even better. And then at the end we said, let's make a catalyst like we make cement with species that do not even dissolve. So we took this charge transfer salt, which has a traditional name, nicarbazine. The IUPAC name is unpronounceable. You know, this is this thing together. It is with a dot here. The dot is missing right now. I don't know where is the dot, but that's okay. So this is the charge transfer salt. It's a conductive organic salt. This is not soluble in anything. This is black powder, not soluble in anything. And we mill it with iron nitrate to a powder the same way we make cement. And then we fire that powder. And that catalyst was the best. And the catalyst that was made without any dissolution, without any complex formation, but with a high stability of the ingredients, so they will withstand until 700, 800 degrees C, and only then they start decomposing. So the high pyrolytic stability makes the best catalyst because it maintains the structure. And these catalysts meet the Department of Energy requirements, not only in our hands. This is the Nissan evaluation protocol data of the same catalyst, and Northeastern validation with the same catalyst, and Los Alamos validation with the same catalyst. In all three hands, the catalyst passes through the design point 08, 100 millivolts, no extrapolation. This is real life data. So there is no need to draw any lines to go to the star. And the reason for that is the structure. Now, we study the structure of this catalyst by multiple methods. I think I'm running out of time. My hour is over. Huh? So let me just give you the next 15 slides in 1 minute. So get ready, okay? We study multiple inputs by principal component analysis to bring together correlations that we don't understand by simply observing data. It's like the way of being stupid and let the statistics do the work for you. We bring together into these statistical models spectroscopy, XRD, structural data, electrochemical data, and bring them together. We also do evaluations of images to extract the morphology data from images to be able to decide what is the contribution of the catalyst morphology to our performance. My associate, Katrina, she does this principal component analysis maps that brings together kind of a comparative influence of different parameters and gives an instruction for synthesis, what to do best. And with this instruction for synthesis, she, for example, tells us, you know, guys, you have to have an iron because there is a positive correlation, and you have to have pyridinic because there is a positive correlation. There is negative correlation with pyrrolic, there is negative correlation with graphitic nitrogen and stuff like that. And you arrive at a hypothesis of what that could be. Then you also study the structural effects on the correlations, and then you design a structure of a graded MEA in order to obtain the performance, you see how structured is this non-platinum catalyst MEA that we make in order to achieve the transport limitations needed for meeting the Department of Energy goals. This is not enough. You also need to work with theoreticians. There are also smart people, like my other associate, Boris Kiefer. He does DFT in periodic solutions, and he is solving different graphene defects. And he tells you which types of defects in graphene, N4 or N2, will stabilize hydrogen peroxide, and which will be eliminating the hydrogen peroxide to do a better mechanism. We have introduced all this idea about designing of non-platinum catalyst as a side defect on graphene, and you have one substitution, one defect of missing carbon and 3 substitution by nitrogen, or 2 missing carbons and 2 nitrogens, 2 missing carbons and 4 nitrogens. And those defects essentially are stabilized. Some of them are highly stabilized by introduction of iron. I mean, you understand that every slide is a different paper, and you have this presentation, you can retrieve the papers and read them. So at the end, we introduced a brand new site that is actually very stable, and it's very easy to make energetically. And that site is 3N with iron. That is not a published site yet in terms of performance, but it is a published site yet in terms of prediction. And now you will see, Plamen, of course, that site is very similar energetically to the N4 site, but it is more easy to make if you look at that from a making of defects into graphene. This site is more difficult to make. Originally, everybody thinks about this site because it's similar to a porphyrin. But this site energetically it has 2 vacancies and 4 substitutions. The other site has 1 vacancy and 3 substitutions, which is less. And voila, something that was not published but is currently being observed. Again, I apologize for this guy, low resolution. But look at this. This is a TM image of a single foil of graphene obtained at Oak Ridge National Laboratory with the help of University of Tennessee. These are the 3 nitrogens. There is EOS data that support that. And this is how from when are only 2 nitrogens, only 1 nitrogen, the site is defected, is deformed. When you put 3 nitrogens, this site becomes symmetric, relaxes back again to the normal structure of the graphene. And here is a demonstration of the iron in an N4 site. This is a first observation, direct observation. This is not a calculation, So the beauty of the high resolution TEM is that you can fantasize through TEM and then through DFT, and then you can see something and say, okay, whatever I did in DFT is good, because you can actually do in DFT almost anything. Then, in order to deconvolute the XPS spectra, we introduced a method by DFT to compute the binding energy shifts. It is not trivial because usually DFT is working with the outer electron sphere. Here we need to compute the shifts in a K and L electron spheres. And we just published that in ChemCom, how we can attribute individual types of defects to discriminate in order to be able to model what is the composition of the XPS spectra. So this essentially is a DFT model of the nitrogen spectra, intimate, fine structure. And with that, we do a cross-referencing with different methods of different activities. And we have in our possession catalysts from Los Alamos, from Northeastern, and from our group to compare, because we work in one big program. And with that, we can actually say that all these catalysts have active site that is very similar to each other, although they're made an entirely different way from different precursors. But after being optimized, they all have the same spectroscopic signature, which somewhat resembles the predicted signature by Dodolé and Frédéric Joyen. So Dodolé group overemphasizes that they need to have different crystallids and associate the catalytic activity with the microporous structure of the catalyst. And that is a slide that I borrowed from Frédéric Joyen. It is his slide that teaches how that is to be explained in the structure. Here is my slide. I think that pores contributes through edge defects. But edge defects of nitrogen are not the only defects that participate in the catalytic activity. In-plane defects are also prevalent because in our catalyst we have way more in-plane surface exposed then of course there is defective surface. But defective surface only cannot explain the process. And then when you do the deconvolution of the spectra with our method that is based on a DFT, you see that we cannot distinguish between N2 and N3 with iron. But we can clearly distinguish iron possessing with a non-iron possessing catalyst. And what I'm not showing here today is that there is a direct correlation between the catalytic activity and iron in-plane defects of these two types. And so now in San Francisco, I will bring a full paper about that, and I will discuss how that correlation about in-plane defects is important. It is also extremely important from a structural point of view, is because the microstructure, the one that is on, let's say, Dodolais/Joyen concept, is the microstructure practically does not contribute to the electrochemically accessible surface area. And if your catalyst is to be active in a real fuel cell, that will be very active in rotating disk electrode because liquid water will get into it. But if you have a triphase interface, this catalyst will suffer from diffusion limitation in a gas phase immediately. And as a result, catalysts that are made so the majority of the active sites are here, but not here, they will have a diminished behavior at high pressure, at low pressure. They will be very much pressure sensitive because if you can supply your water with a high pressure from here, you can push and open these pores. Not open, but access these pores. In order to have a practical catalyst, you need to deploy the catalyst, what I'm arguing, whatever the red line is. Because that is the line that is easier to wet. That is the line when the triphase interface can be established. And these pores here are gaseous pores. They are accessible to the gas only, not accessible to the liquid. Practically speaking, these are different catalysts that we have produced. They all, again, I apologize for the projector, but you can see the difference between a good catalyst and a bad catalyst. The bad catalyst from the same chemical family has much more fine morphology, and it became super hydrophobic, so you cannot wet it. The good catalyst is just below the level of super hydrophobicity. You can wet it. At the end of the day, if your surface area, by whatever technical reason, goes above 400, 600 meters square per gram, you are not adding to the reaction. You need to keep your surface area below certain threshold to be able to be accessed by the water. So these are few ideas that we had. We, of course, are very much interested in making other things. I just was giving you one example, like our new nanotubule materials, our new materials that are graphene-based composites. Ultimately, we have, I think, here are 13 or 14 programs that are in my laboratory funded. The blue sector is in bioelectrochemistry. This sector here is in catalyst design, also 1/3. And this sector is what I called engineering, which means we are studying other people's stuff. So we're studying degradation of other people's catalysts, we're studying degradation of other people's MEAs, we're studying degradation of other people's stacks. So in a way this is work for others, and this is our catalyst portfolio. I managed to describe for you pretty much our work under this program and this program today. So thank you very much for your attention. And again, it was all possible because of these wonderful people who work with me. Thank you.